Hello and welcome to the Secret Society of Man podcast. My name is Zach. I'm here with my cousin Ryan. And this week is Halloween, so we wanted to do something a little bit different. Both of us are interested in true crime, like a lot of people. I like to watch hours and hours of raw interrogation footage. You are a police officer, and so we like to watch these documentaries. But Ryan actually took a trip to the home of Ed Gein, one of the first major serial killers that I think really made breakout news. And so he's going to kind of take us through his trip over to the home of Ed Gein.
Yeah, so this was super interesting, and it kind of comes with being a cop. Like, I love the true crime stuff. I love just kind of like, for me, it's more or less like what makes their brain tick and why would they do something like that. And it's hard to obviously think when you're more of a normal person. But anyway, so I looked into Ed Gein one day, and I'm like, I wonder how far like he is from here. Like, is it driving distance? Sure enough, it is. Like, where we live, it's like just under 4 hours. So it's really not that bad. You can make it a day trip. And a lot of people, if you guys haven't looked into this, Wisconsin is full of serial killers.
Yeah.
Full of crazy freaking people. Jeffrey Dahmer, like I said, we'll talk about at a later time if you guys want. I know a lot of you guys loved the Anthony Sowell stuff, so this is kind of part of it as well. So, all right, so here we go. So, back in April of last year, I was like, I'm gonna go research Ed. I'm gonna go to where his house used to be. You name it, I was there. So, I think what's important for people to understand about Ed is that this actually isn't too far from even our time. So, Ed died in like 1968 or like early 70s, somewhere in there. He didn't get charged until 1956, which we'll talk about. But I want people to really understand, like, this isn't something that happened in the 1800s. This happened like 60 years ago, which really isn't, in the grand scheme of things, a long time ago. So, give you a little bit of backstory. Ed was born in 1906 down in La Crosse, Wisconsin, which is southeastern near Minnesota, like Winona area. His dad had owned a couple shops down there. His mom is extremely religious, and this will play into it later, but essentially he was a mama's boy for the most part. Her name was Augusta, and she was extremely religious, Old Testament, like women are instruments of the devil, like very much like you're going to stay home, read the Bible, and like work on the farm type of person.
Yeah, they one of the reasons why he was sort of insane is because the family was so developmentally stunted because as a part of her religion, she basically just saw everything as a threat. And they were living in like a city at the time, nowhere near as much of a big city as like LA or even Minneapolis, right? But to her, it was a city. And so she saw it sort of like a Sodom and Gomorrah situation where everybody in the city is just a sinner and all the women are whores. And she wanted to protect her boys from all of these like temptations. So then they bought a farmhouse outside of the city, and so they really had no interaction with the outside world.
Yep. So it's said in there that so Ed's dad was an alcoholic, so he had his own demons. His mom kind of despised him for that, his dad, and so they end up leaving La Crosse and they moved to a little town called Plainfield, Wisconsin. Very small. It's essentially smack dab in the center of the state of Wisconsin. And so they move there, they buy a farm, quite a few acres, and that's kind of where they set their feet, right? And so the only time Ed was really allowed to leave was for school. So Ed babysat kids. People said he was fairly normal in that sense. He was a little weird in school, but nothing that was like serial killer vibes, like just a kid that would giggle to himself once in a while. I mean, back then they didn't know, like maybe he had some disability or something, right? So anyway, Ed has brush fire on the property, and all of a sudden he reports his brother missing. His brother's named Henry. And later on, they find bruises on Henry's head, which people believe that was the first time that Ed ever killed anybody. And
Do you know why they think that he might have done that?
yeah, so like there was a lot of issues with his brother bad-mouthing mom.
Yeah.
And Ed's like waterboyed it and is like, he's like, you ain't going to talk about mom that way. And basically, this is my guess, my speculation. The authorities chalked it up to he died of like smoke inhalation. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of problem with that because there wasn't a lot of smoke in his lungs. And if you die, you're not inhaling. So he probably died before that. But anyway,
yeah.
They're like, no, like Ed's pretty quiet. We're just going to chalk it up to it was some farm accident that just happened and he died in the fire. So
yeah, I guess like the circumstances weren't that suspicious and they didn't know what was going on really in the family.
Correct.
Because I guess at this time the dad had died already and like he was an alcoholic and he was physically abusive, but he passed away and ultimately he was also under the thumb of the mom as well. I mean, the mom was just overbearing to the whole family. And it's kind of interesting because you have these two brothers that were raised in the same environment under a mom who falls into like the archetype of like the devouring mother, if you're like into the psychology of that type of character, right? And you have one son that grew up to sort of question it and like think, well, maybe this isn't right and maybe she's been holding us back, really seeing the light. And then you have the other son that just never really saw the other way, bought into the being a mama's boy, and that stuck with him his entire life.
Yep.
And then I guess that ultimately made Ed Gein probably kill him. So
yeah, for sure. So then at that time, so his brother dies. Dad died previously from that. So now it's just him and mom. Mom starts falling deathly ill with a sickness, and basically that is his world at that point. He's just taking care of mom till she dies. So after mom dies, he essentially starts boarding up the house. Like he preserves her room the way it was, like very much like wants to stay in the past, like live as close to his mom as possible, which this will get into for sure the two confirmed killings that he had and then some of the grave robbing stuff that we'll get to. So
can I just say, because what I found to be the most interesting part of the story, kind of like you said, is the psychology, and it really all stems from the mom. So before we move on too far from the part where the mom leaves the story, one thing I found was interesting is that they said that as a result of being so sheltered, even as a grown man, I think he was in his 30s at the time that his mom died, he was so emotionally stunted that when his mom died, I mean, he was inconsolable like a child. Like he was crying as if it was a 6-year-old who just saw his mom die. Like he hadn't developed the emotional maturity to like handle it in a way that an adult man usually would. And so it just shows that over-domineering mother can really have a bad effect on kids.
Absolutely, absolutely. For sure. And so Ed, this is kind of where he really fell off a cliff, like mentally. So as time went on, he essentially wanted to preserve his mom. So what he did was he would go out in town and he killed 2 women. One was at a hardware store and one was, I can't remember if it was a woman he babysat for. He knew this woman, the second woman. I can't remember exactly why at this point. But anyway, both of these women somewhat reminded him of his mom. So this is where we get into the kind of the more grotesque stuff. So when he killed them, he wanted to preserve them. So essentially, like, he would try and preserve their bodies, right? He would tan their skin, like really try and make it so the decomp process didn't happen as quickly, to like act like that was an image of his mom. Like he has a woman at the home again, that kind of stuff.
And one reason that he might have done this is because his mother's corpse was buried in a sort of coffin that essentially is like made of concrete.
Correct.
Because the ground around that area is so sandy. In order to prevent the coffins from like falling in on the bodies, they put it in concrete. And so he probably tried to think of a way to get his mom's body, but he couldn't get to it. So he tried to replicate it.
And so there was 2 confirmed deaths with Ed as far as like him killing people. But Ed's really, I don't want to say fame, but rise to infamy, I guess you could say, was his grave robbing. So Ed was very much a like necrophiliac. He was all about the dead bodies. And anytime he would check the obituaries and see a woman that looked like his, he would go to the local graveyard and exhume the bodies and then keep them for as long as he could. Now, part of this process, too, unfortunately, is some of the bodies he would turn into, like, furniture, okay? And this is that grotesque part. So not only would he try and preserve these bodies, but he would turn things into furniture, which I'll get to later on my trip there. I'm just trying to lay out for you listeners, like, kind of the things I'm going to bring up later you're not confused about on, like, how I got to here. So he would turn body parts into furniture. Anyway, so he goes through this whole thing, and eventually the town figures out who it is, or later on. But the weird part is that this was, like, way later on. So, like, Ed didn't start doing these things until he was in his late 30s, early 40s. So it was really until, like, not in his teen years, 20s. It was later in his life when he started doing these crimes. And he was finally charged in 56. He died in, like I said, I believe it was the late 60s in a mental asylum, essentially, is where he died. Now, Ed was buried right next to his mom in the graveyard. For you listeners, now you kind of know, like, the basis of it. All right, so I go out to Plainfield. I make the 4-hour trek out there. And a lot of things went right that day, and you'll know why in a second. So first stop I wanted to do is, and I did some research prior to this, first stop I did was I stopped at the local library in town, okay? I figured local libraries, especially out there, when it's Plainfield, guys, is a very small town. Like, think about your rural Wisconsin town, that's Plainfield. I figured a local library is going to have history, because where else are these people going to go, right? Mm-hmm. So I go in there, and there's 2 old ladies working at the front desk, and they kind of just let me walk in, and I'm just doing my thing. And right next to the library is an abandoned hardware store. So I walk in, and I'm looking around. I see in the back wall there's, like, old newspapers of, like, old fires and stuff like that, and all that, and I can't find anything on Ed. So I go up to the librarian. This was on a Wednesday at like 8:30 in the morning, so no one's around. And I said, "Hey, I'm looking for, like, do you guys have any real, like, newspaper stories on Ed Gein?" And all of a sudden I see, like, the woman in the back office, she, like, peers through the hallway. And she kind of, like, lifts her glasses up, and she kind of chuckles, and she stands up, and she starts walking towards me. She's like, "You're looking for stuff on Ed Gein?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I told her, I'm like, "I'm a cop, from Minnesota. Like, this stuff interests me." I'm like, I want to make it clear, like, I'm not trying to idolize him. I'm just trying to study like him. I'm trying to figure out, like, why he did this stuff and everything. And she's like, "Okay." She's like, "Well, I'll be honest with you." She's like, we have a book here written about him, but we don't have any, like, photos or anything like that from the house. And I'm like, "Okay." I'm like, "Can you tell me a little bit about him?" Because they're Plainfield residents, and she was alive during the time this was happening.
And they must have had so many people in her time come
yeah,
you. She probably rolled her eyes. I'm surprised they didn't just say, like, "Get out of here."
She told me 2 weeks ago, prior to my arrival, she had a dude that drove from North Carolina come out there to, like, study this stuff. And so she's like, "I'll tell you a story." She's like, "I got some stories that I could tell you." And she's like, "It is true that Ed did babysit people in this town." She said, in fact, some of those people that he babysat are actually still living in this town today. She said, so she's like, "Did you ever hear the story about Ed's house burning down?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't." And she's like, well, there was a fire on his property after he got arrested, and they found everything in his house, and his house completely burnt to ash, burnt to the ground. And he said it's said to this day that the fire department purposely responded with a delay because it was such a bad mark on the city that they were just like, just let it burn. Like, just
It was like
let
2
it
days
happen.
before it was to be auctioned off.
Correct.
And
Yep.
so they were afraid that,
Yep.
I mean, I guess there definitely was people that were afraid that someone was going to buy it and turn it into a museum or like, you know, an attraction. It's obviously not what they wanted to be known for at the time. And so
Correct.
it would make sense that the city just said, hey, let this one go.
Yep. And so kind of under the table they did. Like, they're just like, oh, that sucks. Like, house completely burned down. So she's like, you know, so if you go out there, you're not going to see the house. So just be aware of that. She said, what I want you to also be aware of, though, is be careful the way you go and ask for stuff, because some people still are traumatized by it. Because remember, this happened not too long ago.
In their life.
In their
Yeah.
lifetime. Like, she was alive for this. So she's like, I understand your point. I understand what you're trying to do. But just be careful the way you're, like, asking for information, because you might offend some people. She was super gracious with me. And I said, can I ask you, though? I'm like, obviously, I've done some research before I came out here. I'm like, is that the hardware store where one of his killings happened? She said, yes. She's like, the hardware store right here is where Ed shot the manager, the main clerk, and killed her and took her back to his house.
I didn't know about that one.
And, yep. And so, essentially, he went in, shot her with a shotgun, and took her back to the house, and then did what he wanted with her. But
That's not the one that got her caught, right? Or got him caught, sorry.
no,
Okay.
nope, that's not the one. So, anyway, so she's like, here's what I can point you to. She's like, if you're really looking for some real stuff, she's like, go to the Washura, I think it's Washura or whatever, County Historical Society. That's the county that Plainfield is in. They're like, they will have stuff if that's what you're looking for. I'm like, perfect. So on my way to Washura County Historical Society, it was about an hour drive, so it wasn't close. I actually stopped to the property where his house was, and I looked at old photos on my phone. I kind of lined it up from the intersection to see like where his house would be, and there is nothing there.
What is there now? Nothing?
It's
just land?
nothing. It's just land. Somebody does mow it. Somebody owns it.
Okay.
But there is nothing. There's not even a shed on the property. There's nothing. It's just...
Is it still outside of town, like in the middle of nowhere, or is it built around?
No, it's in farmland. It's completely farms around there. So, I mean, we're talking... Your next door neighbor is a quarter mile down the road.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So, it's still very remote. And then also on my way out, I went and visited Ed's graveyard, because they told me, they're like, if you're going to go to the county and go straight home, you might as well visit the graveyard. And so I went and visited the graveyard, and I found where it was. I found his grave. I found the family. The whole family's buried there, from mom, dad, son, and him. But here's the kicker. So Ed doesn't have a headstone because people kept stealing it. And one was found in like California one time. But people were like idolizing him, right?
Yeah.
So they were like, we're going to steal his headstone. And I'll tell you about another interesting thing later. But anyway, so I visited that. I'm like, oh, this is cool. You know, like this is where he is buried. Like, this is it. And so that time I drove to what I thought was the Historical
Can I ask,
Society.
does his mom have a headstone?
Yes. All three of them have a headstone except for him.
So is it the dad that's also buried there, or the
Yes.
son?
All four of them.
All four of them.
Yep,
Okay.
all four of them buried there. So I drive to what I thought was the Historical Society. It's this huge building, okay?
Okay.
Now, I wasn't planning on going there, okay? So I'm in sweatpants and like a baggy sweatshirt. Like, I'm not dressed for the part. I'm literally just following the trail, right? Like people that are pointing me in directions.
It's like a sort of municipal building.
Yeah.
Sort of thing? Okay.
Well, kind of. So I'm getting to that.
Okay.
So I walk into this massive building, and there's like security guards there and stuff, and I'm like, hey, I'm looking for stuff about like property or like records, and they're like, yep, second floor, go to this room. I walk in this room, and there's like 4 ladies. It's like a U. Mm-hmm. And they're sitting behind their desks, and they all look at me like I am. Dude, people are walking around in suits and stuff. I'm like, I don't feel right. Like, I don't feel right in here. And they're like, what can I help you with? They said, well, I'm looking for, like, records on property. And they're like, yeah, this is records. And I'm like, well, I'm looking for, like, Ed Gein's property. And they're like, oh. They're like, are you looking for, like news stuff and, like, other things? And I'm like, yeah, like, is there a back room that I can go to? And they're like, well, actually, this is not the Historical Society. Oh. This is the county courthouse.
Oh, okay.
And they're like, it's actually right across next door. It's a tiny building, which I thought, okay, like that makes sense. So now I'm walking with my tail between my legs because I look like an idiot going through there. So I look on the door, dude, I walk, it's literally same parking lot. So I walk across the parking lot, and it's this old rickety house, okay, looking thing. And it's 2 stories. And I knock on the door, and the sign says that they're open on Wednesdays from like 8 to 5, and then like a Friday and Saturday. So I got lucky that I came on the one day that they're open. Mm-hmm. So nothing happens, but I knock on the door creaks open. So okay. So I go walking up the stairs, and I turn in the room, and there's this old dude in there. He looks like a skeleton. Like, the guy needs to eat. Super nice guy, though. He's like, how can I help you? I'm like, well, I've driven a long way. I'm looking for, do you have stuff on, like, a property? And he said, how far do you drive? I'm like, well, in total, like 5 hours. He's like, are you looking for Ed?
Yeah, of course.
And I said, yes, I am. He said, right this way. So he takes me downstairs, and I'm like, do you want me to, like, pay you or something? Like, is this like a... He's like, oh, I'll give you a free tour later. I was the only one in this building.
Probably the only one there that month.
Literally.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, don't worry about it, dude. Like, I'll give you a free tour. And I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, but first I'll show you, like, downstairs. So I walk in this room, and it's probably about twice the size of the room we're in right now. And it has just books upon books everywhere on the shelves. Okay, it's about 4 stacks, 4 levels of shelving. There is one point on the shelf that is clearly labeled Ed Gein, and there's about 6 books on there. So he walked me over to the shelf, and he said, this one's all the transcripts from his court trial. This one is all the photos that were taken when the police came to his property. This is photos of him. This is like some other like police filing charges and stuff. So anyway, I take the book out and I sit down, and I'm looking through it, and I'm reading, dude, these transcripts, they have every single word he said in court, everything like that. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. Like, I felt like I was in the courtroom. And so then I kind of got bored because at that point it was kind of just like more or less his lawyer talking. Mm-hmm. It wasn't really him because he wasn't deemed fit per se to talk, right? So then I go to the photos, okay? So I open the photos up, and man, was it messed up. Like, there was...
The police photos of the house.
Yeah, so when the police finally figured out that it was him and he was busted, they end up taking him out of his house. And when they start, like, going through the house, they're realizing, like, there are things here that are not normal. So, like, in the fridge, they found, like, jars of teeth and other things in there that were just, like, not what a normal person would have, like body parts in jars. And then they found lampshades with skin. Some of the light poles were like made out of arms and legs to like hold up the light bulb. Some of the bedding was made out of human that he had. The house was in disarray, obviously. He didn't take care of it. And there was a shed. Unfortunately, there was a shed with a woman hanging upside down, essentially gutted like a deer in the shed that they found. And they later found out that it was one of the women that he recently grave robbed. So she was already dead when he had gotten her. That's why Ed, like I said, he did kill for sure 2 people, but a lot of his infamy was the grave robbing stuff. So, but yes, they found faces. So like he'd cut off their faces and wear their face, which if this sounds familiar to anybody, a lot of people don't know this, but Ed Gein was actually the original, what do you call it? The original thought on the movie Leatherface or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So he is the original person that the director thought of making after somebody, because Leatherface wears people's faces. That's what they do. He cuts their skin off and stuff like that. So that's where that came from. And Ed's nickname is also the Butcher of Plainfield as well. So anyway, they found a necklace of like nipples, human faces cut off. I mean, you name it, like all these body parts were being used. And
the lady that was hanging like a deer, that might come from the fact that it's like a big hunting community. And so everybody there kind of knows how to, and he was a farmhand as well, right?
Yep.
So like he kind of knows how to butcher animals and like, take the organs out and preserve bodies of animals. And so he applied those same skills to humans.
Yeah. So I'm looking through all these photos, and some of it was just kind of like an overview of the property. There wasn't really a lot. But what's interesting is in the photos, like you could tell which room was his mom's room because it was like completely untouched, like in the photos. The bed was made. Everything was perfect. Like it was just so interesting to like still think that after all the things he did, like that was like his God. Like he worshipped his mom, And so, after I was looking at the photos, I really just kind of took it all in, and I'm like, wow, like I can absolutely see how Ed's name is like a stain on that city, Plainfield, And so I closed the book, and I'm like, I go back upstairs, and I'm like, so you got more for me? And he's like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So he walks me through into this jail area, and I thought that they had like this, like they made this for the like a museum type. No. The Historical Society was actually the original courthouse. So this was the jail, and it was also part of a train station. So he brings me in this room, and there was a bench there, and he's like, that third seat, that's where Ed was brought when he was arrested. He was in this room, this exact room, untouched, all the original seating and everything. And he said that's where he sat when he was originally brought in and had to be charged and all this other stuff. Then he took me to the cell that Ed was in. And in the cell, they have a life-size cutout of him. He's very small. He's like 5'5", 5'6". He's really not that tall. Life-size cutout. And in there, they have a dresser with some of the actual belongings from his house. So there's a butcher knife that they have in there that was part of the crime scene that they believed cut up bodies. There was plates, other like switchblades, and I think there was a gun in there, like a rifle in there as well, all confiscated from his house, including the dresser. So he's like, everything in this dresser is original. This is all his. He touched every single item in here. They wouldn't let me touch anything, obviously, but I was getting a free tour, so I wasn't going to complain.
Really quick, did jail cells get more or less comfortable over the years?
More, for sure.
Oh, so like now, if you're going to jail now, you're having a better experience
Absolutely.
than what he had?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I thought it'd been the opposite.
No.
I would bet.
No. Much better now. So, in fact, I don't even think there was a toilet in this jail cell.
Oh, wow.
So, anyway, so he takes me through there. He takes me through the rest of it. Some of it's like they had a doctor's office there, obviously, and just like some other basic stuff. So then and this is kind of, I'll have a little touch on Halloween here in a second. So he takes me upstairs and he walks me to this wall. And on the wall is like this sliding door with a handle. You can slide it up. And I'm like, what's that? He's like, well, believe it or not, this courthouse was also half of a house. So on the other side of that wall was the sheriff's house. And every night, his wife would make the meals for the inmates. So when she would make the food, she would slide it through the pass, and the the deputies would give the inmates food for the night. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And he's like, we have a lot of people come here looking for Ed. And he said, what's your backstory? Like, what brings you here? And I'm like, well, I'm a cop. And I'm curious to think, like, why he did things the way he did. And he's like, he died in a mental facility. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, did you go to his graveyard yet? I said, I did. There's no headstone. He said, yeah. He's like, we used to have the headstone here, one of them that they remade, but we don't have it anymore. I think they either sold it or they did something with it, send it to a different museum or something. And basically, he's like, did they tell you how he was buried? And I said, no. And he's like, well, he's buried like 10 feet down. So he said they purposely buried him deeper than your typical 6 feet because they wanted him to be closer to hell. And they also buried him in like 3 feet of concrete, just like his mom. And he said part of that was the soil, he said. But also, he said the town didn't want anybody attempting to grave rob his body and essentially idolize him. And he said it's the same case with why there's no tombstone anymore, because they just gave up and they're like, we're not going to keep making a tombstone for, people keep stealing it. I'm like, well, that's really interesting. And so this is kind of where we get to a little bit of the Halloween stuff as well. So, as I go walking down the stairs, the second flight of stairs, because this is where the pass was in the jail. It's 2 stories. And I thought he was joking with me, but he's like, yeah. He's like, that my female coworker down there? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, yeah, she's not allowed to come up here. And I like chuckled. Like, I'm like, oh, that's strange. Like, this isn't like women's suffrage. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what the deal is there. And I'm like, he could tell I was like kind of uncomfortable with that comment. Yeah. Like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, the reason why she can't come up here is because of the ghosts. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm like, can you like articulate more? And he's like, yeah. He's like, the second floor of this jail, he said, is extremely haunted. And he said, for some reason, like, females get attacked up here all the time. He said scratches. One's been pushed down the stairs. And he said it's always females. He said for some reason, and he said you can go talk to her. He said she's been attacked before and she won't go up here anymore by herself. He said it's okay if they're with a male, but he said for some reason that's what it is. And so I'm like, wow. I'm like, that's interesting, right, to say the least. And then he proceeds to give me a card of a ghost hunter. And he said he was like related to him or something. And he's like, he said, if you want, this guy can get you the key to this place and you can ghost hunt anytime you want here by yourself or whoever you want to bring. He said, we let that. He kind of manages the time when we're not here. So he said we're not the ones to contact. But he said you're more than welcome to do it. And I think he was more apt because I am a cop. Like I think he kind of gave me more like probably more than he would like a normal person, I guess you could say. So he's like, yeah, man. He's like, anytime you want to actually come out here and investigate, and if you want to do something like that, he said, doors open for you. He's like, feel free. This is a place that you can come. And he actually played 2 EVPs or whatever you'd call them of like ghostly voices that you can hear. And it was super interesting. I mean, I'm like, that's interesting, man. You know,
what
like,
it sound like? The EVPs.
Like just scratchy voices, like not completely. It was hard to understand them.
Nothing groundbreaking.
Okay. Not clear. But he did say he's like, there's 2 main places in this historical society that if you want to like investigate for ghosts, he said one is obviously the 2nd floor. He said you will absolutely get something from that floor. And then he said the doctor's office. He said for some reason people have had. He showed me like he said paper will move in there. Like they'll be working in the historical society, and they'll hear like paper fall off the desk, or like it'll be shuffled in there. They're just like for some reason like that room is just seems active, more active than anywhere else.
Do you know if there's any episodes of Ghost Hunter shows that have taken place there?
Not that I'm aware of. He did say, and I'd have to look at what this guy's name was. But he did say he has his own YouTube channel, and that he did ghost hunt at this place, and it's somewhere on video. So I would be curious to look that up, and I never did at the time. But I mean, if that's what he believes, I have no reason to believe like he would just straight up lie to me like that. Like if he's saying he's experienced these things or whatever, like if that's his experience, that's his experience, you know. He put me in one of the cells on the 2nd floor, and he said this cell has the most activity. Like there was a really aggressive prisoner that was in here, and this is like where it happens. He showed me where a lot of the females get attacked up there. It's like in a certain area, and then near the stairs, which he's like, that's why I never tell them to go near the stairs when they're up there, because I don't want things to happen. I'm like, okay. But I'm telling you, dude, he was dead serious. Like he's like he almost like I was afraid to like he would have been like offended if I honestly didn't believe him. Like he was that serious about it.
I wonder if like I went with Christy, like, or if I sent Christy in there and she asked for a tour, like would he let her go to those areas?
I don't think so. No, well, I think he would if you were with her, because he told me, he said as long as a male's accompanying them.
Oh, so even if he goes up with her, then
yeah, he said
fine.
It's fine,
okay.
But he said my coworker will not go up there by herself.
That makes sense.
He said it won't happen. So I'm like, all right, well, that's it.
Why would they not have cameras up there?
Yeah, it's super interesting.
I
mean,
man.
it's a super old building, but I'm sure they could probably put some.
But
type
I mean,
of
after
powered.
if you have experienced enough stuff to say that it is extremely haunted, you know, you would probably put some cameras up there just to film some of the attacks. Like, oh man, I don't know, dude. Like I'm willing to believe it.
Sure.
But you would think that if that's happening all the time, if you know you're pretty likely to experience something, women are getting attacked all the time, like just put a camera up there and you could have the most famous ghost footage of all time if they just did that.
Yeah.
A woman being attacked or pushed down the stairs or scratched.
Yeah.
If you caught that on camera, like that would be the most amazing thing.
And here's the thing, guys. This, and I'll get to this for real, okay? If you guys are still listening by the time in this episode, if we get to a certain amount of subscribers, we might just go out there for the night and just have a night and just see what we can gather. But we'll see how you guys respond to this. If you guys are like, we want more, and you blow up our channel, well, believe me, we'll make it happen.
I'd be interested to talk to
now,
that ghost hunter that is most familiar with that area.
Yeah, he told me straight up. He like I said, all I have to do is call the honor society, or not the honor, the historical society, and I guarantee he would give me his name and number again. I could call him, and I guarantee you we can make it happen within a month or two, if not 3 months. So,
how far of a drive is it? One way?
It's about 5 hours one way.
So that's an overnight
It's like
trip.
it's like in the dead spot of Wisconsin. So, yeah. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. So, like I said, seriously, guys, I'm being serious. If you want us to go, like and subscribe. If we get enough, we'll make it happen, dude. I will go. I'm serious. Okay, you guys will learn more about me. I'll stick to my word, and we'll make it happen. All right. So we should go. We should do it.
I would go.
You would go? You would?
Yeah, I think that. But I think I would want to go with the ghost hunter. Like.
Okay, so you wouldn't want to do it with just like me and you.
Well, like I want to go with a guy that knows how to capture this, who has got the ghost cameras, who's got the EVP meters. Like I want to.
Well, I feel like I don't know, man. I feel like I've watched enough Ghost where you buy some recorders and you go and just chat, like you just talk and see if you can get anything on recording. Like
yeah, if you wanted to try that, I think what I would do is I would at least want to talk to the guy first.
Sure. And
just hear what his experiences have been about it, and then if we feel like we could go and do it ourselves, then I guess do that. But
I mean, dude, I'll tell you, even in the daytime, it's a scary looking building, man. Like this building was made in the 1800s, so I mean, we're talking some serious old stuff. Like it's freaky looking, like old creaky doors, like you name it, it's freaky. So it was cool, man. Like I said, so then after all that, I come back to the cities, and I'm like, that was totally worth the trip. Like, totally worth it. And I mean, what are your thoughts on Ed Gein? I mean, what are your...
I was really intrigued about the mom and just the family dynamic. Like, it's such a common thing even nowadays, for mothers to be overbearing, and they're that devouring mother, and there's a few different forms that can take. One of them, though, it all comes from like a sort of narcissism in a way, where they see it as I am just being so loving to my kid by trying to protect them that like I'm not doing anything wrong. All I'm doing is loving my child by protecting them. But really it's like a selfish sort of love. They're doing it just to basically like satisfy their own image of themselves. But you're supposed to let your kid, explore the world on their own. And as a parent, you're supposed to provide them with like a safe space where they know they can fall back on you and like rely on you. But ultimately they explore on their own. They learn and they develop into their own person. But some mothers, they are almost afraid that like if their kid grows up, then they're going to not need them anymore. And so they don't even let them experience the world. They don't let them play sports even in some cases. In Ed Gein's case, don't even let them leave the house. And that can it can go one of two ways. And either your child can grow up to resent you and you end up, having a terrible relationship. You got to cut them off and like, you end up not knowing why, right? But then you can go the other way and your kid could fall into your trap. And then now you have this fanatical kid that is not equipped to deal with the world. And I think nowadays we see that in a few ways. I mean, there's a lot of like, serial killers or school shooters, I think, that share a lot of those same qualities. Like they're very sheltered and their moms tell them how amazing they are. And as a result, they get mad when like women reject them. Their mom accepts them, tells them they're handsome and they're perfect and women are the problem for not liking them. And they end up being like that incel type character. I feel like if Ed Gein was a modern day person, he would be that sort of incel sort of guy. I think it was the last person that he killed that he got caught for. It was somebody he was trying to pursue romantically, and she wasn't interested. Yep. And then he ends up killing her, and then that's how he got caught. And the reason he got caught is because people knew that he was kind of like being creepy towards her. Well, you see that all the time now. There's the manifestos of these school shooters, they always talk about how women deserve to die because they're not giving them a chance, and they're Stacys and they only go for Chads and all this weird shit out there, right?
Yeah.
But that's like a real mentality, and I just see a lot of similarities, and I think a lot of that comes from the parenting and the fact that these kids don't get to grow up facing any adversity because their parents just don't let them do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sad. I think it's very possible if Ed didn't have that type of mother, that he would have turned out probably more normal. Like if he was able to socialize more and be able to figure out, because part of the socialization, right, is figuring out how to talk to girls and all that other stuff, right? He never had that. And so, I mean, dude, you've seen Waterboy, right? Mm-hmm. It literally reminded me of the mom from Waterboy, where she's like, the girls are the devil.
Yeah.
And like, that's her. Like that was Augusta, you know? And speaking of that, some of the dude at the Historical Society also said, he's like, people have claimed to see Ed's apparition near his cell, when they do their ghost hunting or whatever in there. So that would be interesting. He did say nothing really happens in the basement. It's usually the main floor and the top floor. But anyway, a little side note with that. But yeah, it's sad. It makes me wonder, like, if Henry was still alive or was able to, because, I mean, technically, well, Henry would probably be dead by now, probably.
Yeah, anybody that was an adult at that time,
brother.
I think,
Yeah.
is dead. But I think a lot of the people that you'll see in the documentaries, they were like children when this stuff was happening.
Yep.
And that's why the people that were alive maybe got babysat by him. And I didn't know that detail, that he used to babysit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. What's interesting is to think about what would happen if he didn't have that mother. I feel like he still did have some kind of mental issue. And the mother probably did too, and I'm sure the kids inherited it, whether or not they were raised to be this way, because he just seemed kind of slow, and by the end of it, there was a psychologist that visited him in the hospital, and she mentioned how small he was as well. She said it was very difficult to imagine him doing all these brutal, horrific things.
Yeah.
But he was also basically incomprehensible. Like you couldn't communicate with him at all. Like he was just out of his mind. But also very peaceful. Like he never caused any issues or anything like that. And he was found innocent by way of insanity.
Yes.
And I know that doesn't mean we talked about this before, that doesn't mean that they just get off, scot-free.
Right.
But I wonder if people feel closure, like the closure of justice being served with the way that turned out.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because I remember I asked the historical guy, I said, how did that go with Ed being buried in the same place he exhumed bodies? And he's like, well, that's an interesting question, because I read that in one of the books that was down there. And he said they essentially, so at first the city wanted nothing to do with it. The citizens were like, absolutely not. Like, he will not be buried in the same place that he essentially victimized these people's family members. And something happened to where the city was like, Ed deserves to be buried with his family regardless of what happened. And if I recall, again, it was a while ago. This was over a year and a half ago. If I recall, there was a lot of issues the day they buried him. Like, there was a lot of, like, security. They needed to make sure that they got the job done so people didn't, like, burn his body. Like, just totally erased him from this earth. So, very interesting.
Over the years, how much piss do you think is in that grave? That's got to be the pissiest grave in history.
Yeah, and you know what's strange, though? Like I said, you honestly, if you didn't know three of his, like, names of his family members, you'd have no idea where he's buried. All that's there as a tombstone is about a rock that's less than the size of a baseball, and it's placed on top of where his head would be. That's it. There's nothing. There's no writing on it. It's literally a stone. And you'd miss it. And I do have photos on my phone still that I can show you from when I was out there. But it has A. Gein. I can't remember his dad's name at this time. Do you remember his dad's name? It was like...
I thought it was like George or something like that.
Yeah.
Correct.
G. Gein.
Yeah.
And then H. Gein. And then next to it's this little rock. And super interesting. And I mean, it just goes to show how much disdain the city had for him. Like, they literally, like, again, I thought he was joking. No, he was for real. When he's like, they buried him 10 feet to be closer to hell. Like, that's like hatred, dude. That's like, bro, we hate you so much that, like, we want to bury you, probably not as far as they could, but an obvious amount length, right? So, man, it's wild, dude. It's wild. I mean, just going out there, I recommend it to people, but please be respectful, because that, like the woman said, like, she's told me horror stories where people come in and be like, yeah, I'm looking for all these body parts and stuff, and these people are like, the hell's wrong with you? You know what I mean? So
yeah, it's a sensitive subject, but people are fascinated by it, and I think people that live there gotta understand that. In one documentary that I watched, they were trying to figure out the phenomenon of why people like this type of thing, and they attributed it to people are drawn to the suffering of other people.
Sure.
But I didn't really think that was right. Like, I don't think that describes why I was interested in that topic, or for me, I'm a big interrogation footage guy, so I'll listen to all the, just murders or whatever.
And stuff?
Yeah, where the police get the confessions, and because I always like hearing directly from the killer, right? I kind of want to know, like, what happened exactly, like, what were they thinking, right? That's what's most interesting to me. It has almost nothing to do with the suffering of the victim. Like, that's the part that I'm least interested in. But she seemed to think that was overall what was so perplexing about this stuff to people. So, like, you're obviously interested in this too. I think most people are. But for you, what is it about these types of things that really gets you interested?
Yeah, man, it's just, I really have started getting involved with threat assessment, and I think I may have brought that up before, but essentially what threat assessment is you learn behaviors of people to figure out if they're going to commit crimes or not. It's essentially like a more real version of what you see in Criminal Minds, where that guy Spencer, whatever his name is like, oh yeah, this is some type of thing that happened in his life and he's more likely to do this, or, it's kind of similar to that. And that's kind of where I kind of take that, is like, I'm trying to find like common themes here between all these serial killers, like Gacy, Dahmer, other ones that I looked into, which I can bring up later. There was one I actually just started looking into from Iowa. He killed like 6 people with an axe. Not the woman that, what's her name, that killed with an axe. But anyway, point is, I'm trying to find out, like, what is it about all these killers, especially these cold killers, like the ones that Ted Bundy, other things like that, like, why? What was their upbringing like? Like, are there similarities there? Are there other types of things that happen in their life? Like, a lot of it is based around sexual deviance. Now, with Gein, that wasn't the case. In fact, it was the complete opposite. His mom damn well made sure that dude was not around any girls.
But as a result, though, don't you think that this could easily be a case of like an Oedipus complex? Do you know what that is?
Honestly, no.
Okay, so that there's a character called Oedipus, and it was a Shakespeare character.
Okay.
But he was attracted to his mom. So it's like it's a phenomenon that happens a lot of times with like younger males.
Okay.
But there'll be some sort of attraction to their mother, and it's something that like kids will grow out of, but sometimes like they don't. And the character Norman Bates.
Yeah,
I mean, he's
Psycho.
He's a perfect example of that. Okay, so like he's the manifestation of the Oedipus complex. So it's that sort of thing because he's fascinated with his mom, and that's a part of his character. Well, a lot of these serial killers sort of have that. And Ed Gein, I mean, he like you said, he worshipped his mom basically. And if your mom spends your entire upbringing when you're really trying to, part of being socialized is, like you said, talking to girls and like figuring out like what attracts you and things like that and exploring that with women. If you're not allowed to do that, the only woman that you interact with is your mom. And also she's created this image in your head that she is the perfect woman and all the other women are terrible sinners. Then it makes sense that in his mind, even if it wasn't necessarily a sexual attraction, like she was the ideal woman to him.
Yeah.
And she was really all that mattered. So there was that on some level. And so I think that that did play a big part.
So you're saying sexual deviance did play a part in it?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, back then DNA really wasn't a technology. Like they weren't able to test for semen on dead bodies. Like what are the chances that there was nothing sexual about what he was doing? He wasn't a necrophile. If he was already digging up graves for women that like looked like his mom who he idolized, like there must have been some kind of sexual component.
Very possible. And some of that too, like, I mean, there is that beauty point to it, like you were saying. Like there's a reason why he cut off their faces and wore their skin, right? Like I think there probably was that, like, I want to look like them, or like I want to be literally in my mother's skin is probably what, as close as he could get to it, per se, right? So you're probably right in that fact. I didn't even think about that point.
And actually, one thing too is that they found whenever he, after his mom died, I mean, he was living basically in isolation in an increasingly dilapidated house that he didn't take care of. He got really into reading, and so they could find the books that he was reading, and they found that over time, as he was just sitting there, isolated, stewing in his own thoughts, that he would eventually get into like pornographic sort of literature and things. So I really do think that and what's interesting is going back to like how this relates to modern people. I think the same incel sort of communities, a lot of times why this sort of thought process happens is because they go onto Reddit or whatever forums on alternative websites where they can just go and isolate themselves with people that feed into their own delusions that all think the same way. And you have no outside influence to like correct your ideas. Well, for Ed Gein, it was sort of the same thing where he was just sitting there in his own thoughts, nobody to influence him away from that. And so it just got crazier and crazier. And there's some people that they get addicted to like porn and they just like find more and more depraved things because they just go down the rabbit hole. And I think that that's really what Ed Gein was doing. And at the end of the day, it ended up becoming like a necrophiliac thing. And it could have been that he wanted to act out these urges, but he couldn't do it with women. And so maybe a part of him thought that the best way he can do it is to get dead bodies because, hey, maybe he's not hurting anybody because they're already dead, and that's just what he did. And then after that, it escalated to actually killing somebody, I think that if we were able to really get inside of his head, there probably was a progression from him being innocent to what he did now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great take. Honestly, I didn't even think about that. But that one thing I did notice is like sexual deviance with a lot of these guys.
And suppression. Like with, Ted Bundy, I don't remember what his backstory is, but I think there was a lot of like there's a sexual component to what he was doing.
He was huge into porn, and the like you said, the like weird porn too, like aggressive porn. So
and it's like once you get into that stuff, like there's not a lot of people that are going to like work with you on that. So like
hey, stick this knife,
So like he needs to, if he wanted to act it out, he had no choice but to just do it against people's will. And so I think it's, or like I can't. Who's the Milwaukee one? I forgot his name.
Dahmer.
Yeah, Dahmer. So and Dahmer,
He
was gay.
Gay.
And that obviously is a suppressive element.
Yes.
And also he was into extreme things too, like you said before. He wanted to do things that they wouldn't ever agree to. And so I think it's just the fact that they're trying to act out on their fantasies that they just can't share with other people.
Dahmer straight up said, and it's in a reporting, like you can find the clip. Dahmer straight up said when he was in prison and being interviewed that he strongly believes that him being gay or sexually deviant in a lot of ways was a huge driving factor for what he did on a lot of stuff. Obviously, we don't hate gays. Like, don't get into that. It's not about that, people. Okay, but it's like that's what he was saying. That's what he believed. Now, is he all there? Not really. As we talked about in the past, he knew what he was doing is wrong, but he didn't really care that it was wrong. He wanted to just do it, his animal instinct. So, and again, we'll get into all that. If you guys love this stuff, like we got plenty more that we can talk about. One that I'll bring up even at a later time is Ed Kemper. I don't know if you're aware of him.
I've heard of him. I forgot what the story is.
Same concept, kind of with his mom. So, he loved his mom, but he loved his mom growing up. Then he absolutely hated her for something that had to do with the sexual side, like relationship, women, stuff like that. He ended up cutting her head off and having sex with her head, and then went to prison, obviously. If anyone's interested, Mindhunter on Netflix.
That's the only reason I know who that is.
Covers
yeah.
Ed Kemper.
I just know what he looks like because of that.
So they cover Ed Kemper in the first season. So if you guys are interested, and by the way, that's all based on a true story. That's how the FBI came up with the threat assessment stuff that I'm kind of learning from right now, and kind of how serial killers tick. That's kind of what made them start it was around that era, and Ed Kemper was one of the guys that they actually studied. So super interesting. So yeah. Is there anything else you want to add on that? Or
no, but I think it's really cool that you took a trip out there to do that.
Yeah, and like I said, guys, I do recommend it, but there's a right way to go about it, okay? If you're looking and if you love this true crime stuff like I do, and I know, Zach, you're interested in that stuff, go out there. I think there's a lot to be said when you immerse yourself there. Like, I stood outside the property of where Ed Gein's house was. And you can honestly just sit there and just take it in for a second and be like, a lot of bad stuff happened here. And you can almost feel the just kind of like, just the dampness of the air. Like, it just is heavy there. You know what I mean? So,
how would you, if you went to another town for another serial killer, is there any way that you would approach that trip differently?
I don't think so. I went there leading wherever I was going to be pointed to, and I kind of liked that.
Would you start at a library again, or would you go for more of a historical society first?
Depends. So, like, if it's Dahmer, that's in Milwaukee. I'm probably going to go to the historical society because a library in a city like that is so large that these people working there are probably our age.
Yeah.
And they probably aren't going to have any, like... You know what I mean? Whereas I went in Plainfield and you got the 85-year-old working there because that's like one of the 10 jobs there. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I'll probably go to the Historical Society first and really get an idea of that stuff. The other thing I know is Dahmer's apartment was actually torn down. So you can go to where the property was, but the complex he actually lived in was torn down because people, just like Ed's house, didn't want it there anymore. It was such a disgrace on what happened that they just wanted it gone.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right, man. Yeah, that was really interesting.
Cool.
Thanks for sharing that.
One more thing, guys. Just remember, truly, if you do want us to go and you like this stuff, like and subscribe. And if it goes somewhere, we will make it happen. All right? So.